Hi, welcome to the HTT Vodcast, where I'm going to be talking about ARCs. Recently, I just got back from BGG-Con. I got this cool shirt while I was there. I also got a cold. So if I sound a little sick, it's the illness giving that off. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about ARCs. I taught it there for the first time, and I wanted to talk about my experience learning how to play the game and teaching it, because that's kind of what this whole channel's about. So originally, this video was going to be a rules reaction, which is hilarious. So the idea would be that I would literally read the rulebook for the first time on camera out loud, like it was story time, and then I would react to the things I was reading. And it was just as bad as you would think it was. I recorded for like an hour and I was bored. So yeah, that sucked. So now what this is it's more of a review. I'm going to give my thoughts on the rulebook. I'm going to talk about how well I think the rulebook was written. I'm going to talk about how easy I think it was to teach from just reading the rulebook. Kind of like my plans for how I'm going to approach teaching this game in the future. Talk about like my experience teaching it at BGG. And yeah, so let's just get right into it. So if you don't know what ARCs is the new hotness from Leader Games. It is from the same people that made Root. I think it might even be the same designer. It might be the same designer. I don't know. The same artist did it though, and it looks gorgeous. It's kind of a diet trick taker meets war game. And they sent me a copy. Leader Games sent me a copy, and I appreciate them so much. That was very sweet of them. Thank you so much, Leader Games. This episode's not sponsored by them, but they did send me the game, which was very sweet. Yeah, let's just dive right into the rulebook. So the first thing that I like about the rulebook is that it has a table of contents on the front of the rulebook, which normally is reserved for like just art or whatever, and it'll just say like rulebook on it, which it's like, duh, it's the thing in the box with the game. Like, of course it's the rulebook. Like, I like that they put the table of contents on the front and then they have the index on the back. So it is really awesome that they did that, because then when I pick up the rulebook, usually, like if you think about how a rulebook is normally used at the table, normally it is because someone is looking something up. So you might be thinking like, oh, I need to look at an action like clarification, so I'm gonna go to page 12, and then I can just go there, boom, I'm there. I don't have to like open to the first page and then look for an index on the first like 2 pages, and then it's like, okay, there's the index, so then that's gonna be that. It just saves you like that one extra step. It's so nice. So I like that. I like the index on the back. I haven't really used or had any real reasons to use the index that much throughout the game. When I played it, I think I used it once or twice, and it was nice when I had it. It's organized by like, it'll have like keywords and then subcategories that kind of modify those keywords, which is really nice. So like you have actions on page 8, 10, and 20, and then from there you have battle, build, influence, move, repair, secure, tax, which you have like all the actions, and or like cities and like power bonuses from, resources slots from, taxing resources from, and then in parentheses it has like the tax action. So it's like it's organized really well. I think that this is very useful for people that are looking. I think it's even more useful than the table of contents for finding those like rules clarifications, which is very good. So when you actually open it up, it goes to the introduction paragraph, which I think is really good. It gives you a nice little introduction to the game, and it does have one thing I don't like about it, which was that it does talk about the reach, which, let me see if I can find it. Yeah. In ARCs, you lead a spacefaring society through an epic saga as you try to survive the harsh and dangerous Reach at the galaxy's edge. I don't know what the Reach is. What the frick is the Reach? The Reach is just the name of is basically just the name of the board. It just is the area that you play the game in. It's called the Reach. And I do also like that it calls its main power or main victory point system is called power, but it does clarify that it's essentially points, which I think was very cute. And I also like that it's honest about playtime as well. So it says like your first game of ARCs will take about 45 minutes per player. After you play it a few times, a game should take about 30 minutes per player, which is really nice. As someone who teaches games, I like knowing how the first playthrough is going to affect the playtime, rather than like having to just assume that it's going to add X amount of time, because sometimes your first play can actually go a lot faster because people don't know the strategy, so the first person to figure that out can just steamroll a game and just take it away. So yeah, I think that that's really cool that they included like, hey, it's going to take longer than it normally will, and it's going to be about 15 minutes longer than you expect it to be per person. So that's really cool. I think that's pretty neat. I like its little what's in the box section. I like one of the things that I think that more board games need to start doing is include a component list like Arcs did, where it talks about like, hey, it's this thing and here's what it does in the game. Even if you don't know what that means yet, just an introduction sentence to tell you like, this is like what the thing is. So starports. Starports are built on planets and are used to build ships. Boom. Got it. Cool. Don't know how the details of any of that works, but I do know that that's what starports are for. When I hit that point in the rulebook, I know I'm going to be looking out for like building ships and planets and things like that. I don't really have too many complaints for that part of the rulebook. The setup, when we get to setup, and this is all still to me just like learning the rules. You know, I went into this knowing basically zero of the rules. I knew that it was like kind of a war game, kind of a trick taker. So that's pretty much the only like context I had for learning the rules. And so, you know, the first couple pages really helped, you know, establish some kind of ideas in my head about what I'm getting into. We get to setup. And the setup is a bit lengthy for this game. It does something a little weird that I haven't really seen any other games do, which is basically it's put its setup on the cards. So let's talk about that. So this game uses setup cards, which are, they give you, I think, about 3 per player count, 4 per player count. I believe it's 4 per player count. Yeah, so you have 4 2-player setups, 4 3-player setups, 4 4-player setups. You can shuffle and do these randomly, although there are a few in here that they specifically marked for experienced players, which I find weird that I don't think there's one for 4 players, though, which is interesting. Like, you have 4 just normal 4-player maps. I guess they couldn't come up with, like, a harder variant. But, yeah, Arcs has these setup cards, and the reason I don't like these is because it makes it kind of hard to distribute stuff, and they're kind of confusing. So, you know, you set up everybody's stuff as normal, you set up the board as normal, but once you get to actually putting everyone's like starting pieces out, that's when things kind of take a real sharp grinding halt. So I figured this would be an okay time to talk about like kind of what things are while we set things up. But yeah, the cards are very confusing, which kind of throws a wrench in that because I'm focused so much on trying to decipher these cards that it's hard for me to tell other people at the table, okay, so you're gonna put these things here, you're gonna put these things there, and you know, this is what they do. I'm really like, okay, so I'm player 2, which means that we're doing A right now, so I need to go to sector 2A, and in 2A, which they don't put what you need on these cards either. So you have to reference the rulebook and these cards, which is annoying. I wish they were like on the back of the, you know, the player boards or something, just to show you where you start. Even just 3 small sets of icons would have been perfectly fine. I don't know why they didn't. But yeah, everybody's supposed to put their starting pieces out. And you put 3 ships in one city on the things labeled A. You put 3 ships in one starport on the things labeled B, and then 2 ships in the system labeled C, which isn't that confusing until you realize that everybody has a number for their player number, and then they have like a subletter. So it's like everybody, like player 1 has 1A, 1B, 1C, player 2 has 2A, 2B, 2C. And so when you're trying to bounce between those and then also say numbers at the same time, like, okay, so you're in player 1 and you need 3 ships in 1 city, and it goes into it's just like a big cluster of trying to get things set up. So it is an unfortunate stumbling block to the very beginning of the teach that you have to deal with this kind of setup. If you can set up ahead of time, like while people are like going to the bathroom and getting snacks or whatever, it's not that big of a deal because you can just set everything up where it's supposed to go and it's fine. But yeah, another thing I don't really like about setup, and this is more on the gameplay side of things, so in Arcs you actually don't ever use the full board. Even when you're playing 4-player, I believe, you always will have one sector of the map just like carved out. So there are 6 clusters on the board, and each cluster, let's see if I can do this. I doubt I can, but we'll find out. This is a podcast. I don't know why I'm trying to visualize this, but on the map there are 6 clusters, and so each cluster has 3 systems in it. And the way that I mnemonically remembered that was clusters are chunks, systems are slices, and that seemed to work pretty well for people remembering, which mostly was just me because I was the only one that really needed to remember. But yeah, you use these little like arcing cover parts that go on the map, and these are essentially just to cover up the clusters, the gates, I think as they're called. And then you have little like circle planet markers that cover up the little triangle place a building thing on the planets. And I don't know what gameplay ramifications they came up with to like decide what clusters to cut out for each player count, but every time it was very confusing because they're adjacent in the gates, so you have to remember that you can like wrap around. It's like when you're playing Mario Brothers, like the original Mario Brothers, where the screen wraps around, and you have to tell yourself like, oh yeah, the screen wraps around. Every time you get to the edge of the screen, you think you're cornered. You're like, oh yeah, I can go this way to appear on the other side. That's exactly what this feels like, and it's super annoying, and I never could quite get that right. And it's intuitive, it makes sense, like whatever, but it is weird that you have these giant sections of the board that are not used, and not enough of them are covered. What I think I'm going to do is take a good picture of it and then 3D print like basically like flat covers that cover up the whole chunk, so that way there's no ambiguity that there's supposed to be something there. Hopefully that'll make the board seem a little bit more readable at a glance, at least for me. This probably isn't a problem for anyone else. That was one of the things that bothered me, but that was my problem with setup. Oh, and then after you're done with setup, I'm not done with talking about setup. Once you were done with setup, then you have to give everybody resource tokens from their A and B planets. So after you just finished, you're also like, okay, now I have to find out. So that's player 3, that's player 3, that's your A, that's your B. I mean, granted, you just do it whichever ones have the triangles on them, so it's not the end of the world. But I intuitively understood that I probably wouldn't really want to deal out the court deck with all the Vox and Guild cards. I really don't like having to set that up right at the beginning because it kind of distracts. What I did was during my teach, I left it set up as just a normal deck, and then when I started talking about the actions, the the influence and secure actions, that's when I dealt those cards out, and that seemed to work pretty well, so I'm probably going to keep that as part of my teach. But let's keep talking about learning how to play. They start in with like the arc of play, which I think is cute, and they give you like a kind of a general overview of all the concepts, which I think is nice. They basically talk about how you can obtain different scoring criteria, essentially. And overall, the game is actually very easy to figure out who's winning in terms of points. I guess I should explain for people that don't know how this game works. Basically, throughout the game, you're going to be declaring your own objectives. Depending on what objectives are declared will determine what people score. And 3 of the 5 basically work under the concept of whoever has the most of that particular set of symbols. So, for example, Tycoon is looking for material and fuel. And if you have the most material and fuel symbols, whether that's on a resource or on cards, then you get the points for that. You get the power for that at the end of each round or chapter. I think that the overall structure of the game is fine, and this is fine for explaining it. The ambitions were not tricky for me to kind of visually imagine what they're going to look like, because the only ones that were a little tricky were the other 2, which were trophies and captives for it was like Warlord and something or other. Which were the other 2 ambitions? Tyrant and Warlord. So I think that the Tyrant and Warlord ambitions are a little bit more confusing because they don't care about symbols at all. They exclusively care about what you have in your trophies and captives sections on your player board, and you get trophies from destroying stuff, and you get captives from taxing and securing stuff. So it's, again, none of it's complicated, and that's going to be a running theme of this, is that none of this is complicated. Like, anything on its own is not a complicated thing. It's just there's so much of it that it makes it very tricky to get through. Yeah, individual concepts, they pile on really quickly. I think around this part of the rulebook where it's talking about all the concepts did I start getting a bit overwhelmed, especially things like agents and the courts, damage and control, trophies and captives. Once it hit those sections, like, I know what those mean now, but I can remember when I was first reading it, like, okay, this is a lot, like, I'm keeping up, but barely. And then we get into the sort of trick-taking, which every group that I've played this game with has, and I say that like I've played it a lot. I played it twice. Every group that I've played this with has kind of come to the same conclusion that I did, which is this isn't really a trick-taking game. It is like, it just has more unique action selection. Like, it's not really, you're not really taking tricks. Like, you don't get to keep the cards. The cards you keep don't have any real matter. You're just fighting over who gets to lead the next trick, which is called having initiative. And taking that initiative is called securing initiative. Pretty much the main trick-taking part of the game is essentially just the beginning of your turn. You play a card, and then you do actions based on what card you played. The lead player always gets to do all the things on their card, and the number of things you get to do is based on the number of pips on the card, and then based on the suit is what actions you have access to that you can spend those pips on. So if you play, for example, I played this 4 aggression. It's got 2 pips, and it has the battle move and secure actions on it. That means I can take 2 actions, any combination of battle, move, or secure. So it is very straightforward. The problem comes when it doesn't follow normal trick-taking rules. So for starters, when you lead a trick, so let's say I lead a 3 of administration. Lead a 3 of administration. I get to do all 3 of the pips actions on it, tax, repair, or influence. And then now it goes, let's say we're in a 3-player game. Now it goes to player 2's turn. They can't, like, following suit only matters if you're playing a higher number. And it's not like there's a bunch of numbers either. It just goes 1 through 7 in a 4-player game, or 2 through 6 in a 3 and 2-player game. The only things you're allowed to do when you play a card following are following suit, but playing a higher number. So if I had a 4 when someone led a 3, I could play that and follow suit and do what's called surpassing. Or I can play, let's say I had that 2, but I really needed to take like the tax action. I could play that face down and do what's called copying, which copies the lead player action, which playing cards face down in a trick taker, while an interesting idea, is not a thing you can normally do. And this stays face down as well, so you don't know what card that was, which would, in theory, would be interesting, but you'd have to really be counting cards for it to actually mean anything. And then you can pivot, which means you play a card of a different suit face up, and you just get 1 action no matter how many pips are on it. At the end of a round, when everyone's played their cards and taken their actions, whoever surpassed with the highest card of the matching suit that was led seizes the initiative. During the round, though, people have other options to seize the initiative early in order to steal it from whoever should have gotten it next round. The first way is if you're in a 4-player game, if you play a 7, you immediately seize the initiative, which is interesting. It's essentially the ace of the game. Or if you play any other extra card. So like if I play, let's say someone led a 2 of administration and all I had was construction and aggression cards in my hands, I could play, like the 4 of aggression and then play just any other card face down. So I'm burning an extra turn, essentially, to steal the initiative. And I don't know how I feel about that, because the only reason that you really want the initiative is to declare ambitions, which are, again, the way that you score points. So I don't quite know what that's for. I don't quite know why they made it so confusing and why you have to burn extra cards to seize the initiative. I also don't know why they made it so you can't follow suit and still not get all the actions. There's a lot of weirdness to the things, which actually in my recent upload for the crew, it actually makes me kind of not regret, but like kind of wish I put an asterisk when I recommended playing arcs as a way to learn how to play trick takers, because it's got so many weird things that it's basically not a traditional trick taker in any way. So, whatever. When you go to play cards, when you're the lead player, and this is still learning the game, so you learn about, like, it's interesting. You learn about, like, the first half of the first player's turn, which is weird. So, like, I learned that when I lead this card, the suit that I led is everyone has to match if they want to surpass and get all their actions. I also learned that I can declare an ambition, which is to whatever icon is on the card. Not all cards have icons. Whatever icon is on the card, you declare that ambition. There are 5 of them: Tycoon, Tyrant, Warlord, Keeper, and Empath. And Tycoon, Keeper, and Empath just involve symbols, and then Tyrant and Warlord are like the captures that we talked about. So you learn that you play a card, you learn that you can declare an ambition, and then you don't learn about the rest of the actions on your turn. They just kind of go like, all right, and then the rest of the people take their turns because they want to talk about the card part first before getting into all the actions. So that was weird. So in my head, I originally thought everybody plays their cards and then you take your actions, which I think would have been more interesting and would have given a lot more preference to the person who has initiative. It gives you more information to work with on what everyone's planning on doing. I see that you followed suit with aggression. Like, you're gonna do, the battle or secure stuff. So I know that I need to do this, that, and the other. So I don't know. It's weird that they talk about exclusively the card side of things and then basically skip over the actions until later. I get why they did it, and I don't know what the better way to do it would be. So maybe it was just kind of an impossible problem, and this was the best they could come up with. Something else that I noticed while reading the rulebook at this point is that there are a lot of notes in like the margins. So as you read through the game, there are these like middle sections of the book that aren't really used for anything really noteworthy. They use it for example text and just kind of like hints. So just like reminders, like one of the things is that surpassing only needs a card higher than the lead card, not all played cards. So if someone leads like the 2 of construction and the person before you plays the 4 of construction, they've surpassed, which means they get all the actions on their card. Well, you can also surpass with a 3 of construction, even though the person before you played 4, because all you need to surpass is to play a higher number than the lead card, which is, it's an extra thing. It's one more thing on the list of many things that this game does, which is, again, I'm complaining because it's just hard to teach. Once you get into it, it's really fun and interesting, but getting there is a pain, which is why I hope they sponsor an episode of How to Teach, because I think this game really needs an episode of How to Teach, because I think I have a way to break this down better than it does in the rulebook, and how to play video I think would do it. So I think a How to Teach video would make a lot of sense. I'm going to talk about kind of my ideas for that in a little bit. After you learn about all the card shenanigans that people do and how initiative works, you then get to learn about all the actions. And I find it interesting that they start with the tax action, which I find weird because it gives you resources and stuff and potentially gives you captives and like all these other things that you're probably not like 100% familiar with. I think they should have probably started with build because it's the simplest one. If you've got stuff in a place, you can build stuff. And if you got a ship there, you could build a city or a starport. And if you've got a city or if you've got a starport there, you could build a ship. And it's the most straightforward of the actions. I don't know why they didn't start with that one. Similarly, move is also very simple. It's just pick a number of things and move it to an adjacent place. A number of ships, I mean. You can't move your cities or starports. The one kind of caveat to that is the catapult move, which I kind of wish was just unlocked in round 2. Not because I think it would make for better gameplay, just because it's a weird thing to know when to explain. So the catapult move, the way it works, if you're moving ships from a starport, you can take a catapult move, which basically lets you pick a number of starships on that system, which, remember, system is a slice, and then you just can keep moving it until you hit a sector where you where someone else controls it. So in theory, if you have 50 ships on one starport and no one controls anything, you can pick those up and then move them all around the map and drop them off as you go. And you could just leave it all. It is a buddy of mine figured out really quick at the very beginning of the game. His first move out of the gate was he did a catapult move and basically dropped ships off at 4 different systems. And then his next turn, he led a construction 2 or whatever, and then built a city in every single one of them. Which, Jesus, yeah, that was insane. And it was the first thing he did in the turn. So it was kind of, and since he had all those ships there, I think he left one in one of the gates. He made it so that none of us could even could catapult there. So we actually literally had no way to stop him. Unless one of us seized, one of us would have had to have the foresight to seize initiative, but in your first game, you don't know you could do that. So I think that the catapult move, while interesting and does make for a lot of really cool moments in the game, where someone all of a sudden teleports across the maps, I I feel like in a beginner game, I would only explain it in like round 2, which I did my first time teaching it, and the other players had the classic, oh, I would have played differently if I'd known that was an option. And it's like, yes, that's how knowing more things about the game works. Like, it's either that or I confuse you by teaching you too much. So catapult moves are interesting. It's this kind of habit of everything basically having a catch to it. The only action that doesn't have a catch is repair, which is just if you have a thing that's damaged on the board, you can flip it up right, which ships tipped on their sides are damaged, and cities and starports that are flipped over onto their damaged side can be flipped over, and that's the repair action. It's the easiest one by far. I wish that all of them, well, I guess influence is also really simple, which is just place one of your agents, your little dudes, on a card in the court, and then secure is where it gets interesting, because then you take a card that you have control over, which means you have more than everyone else, and you get everybody's agents that they had on those cards if they tried to stop you. In my first game of this, we 2 guys got in a bidding war for a particular card, and when the guy secured it finally, he got like 20 agents. It was insane. I don't know if that's like normal, but it was funny. And then finally you have battle, which they actually take battle and put it on its own pages, which I think is smart because it has a whole process that you go through. The process is actually like less involved than I think they make it come out to be. Because I can explain it really quickly. However many ships you have attacking or how many dice you can grab. You can grab any color of dice. There are 3 colors, red, yellow, and blue. Blue is the safest. You will never take damage from it. Red is the riskiest and you'll blow everything up. Yellow is the raid dice, and you have the highest chance of being able to steal stuff from people, and also you're going to likely blow cities up. That's pretty much the whole gist. And then there's some other special symbols that determine like how, damage is dealt. I kind of wish that the damage was optional, because damaging cities in this game can actually be really detrimental for you, and I kind of wish that there was an option to not deal damage. But that's just me. Because, like, in my head, it makes sense that I could choose to not go, I could, like, not fire at their buildings. Like, I feel like it's not hard to, like, aim just at their starships. It's a whole thing. So, around this point, there's a lot going on. I learned all the actions, and each action has extra stuff going on, and it makes it very difficult to explain. Once you get through it, it all makes sense. Again, nothing in this game is complicated. It's just getting through it all is very difficult. Battling has a bunch of outcomes, and I actually, moving around like my second teach, I realized I'm just not going to talk about battling and declaring ambitions during the first couple turns, because no one really should be battling that early in the game, unless you're just bloodthirsty. But also, with stuff I'll talk about later, the way that I have planned for teaching is that you wouldn't declare ambitions in the first round, you'd instead have them preset, but we'll talk about that in a sec. You get to this point where you talk about outrage when you destroy a city after there, and they talk about prelude anywhere. Let me see if the index says where it's first introduced, because prelude is only talked about after you get to the destroying cities parts, which is, in my opinion, a bad order to explain that in. So, prelude is basically a pre-turn step where you've played your card, but you haven't done anything yet. Depending on what cities you've destroyed, will limit what prelude actions you can take. And the way you take a prelude action is by spending resources. So this is one of the reasons why you'd want to get resources, because they let you do these bonus actions, which supplement your lack of ability to do things on certain turns because you just don't have the right cards. They keep talking about prelude, and they mention it in resources a little bit later, but yeah, they don't really genuinely talk about prelude actions until later, because they talk about them when they talk about the different guild and lore cards. So yeah, this is where the rulebook starts losing me and starts kind of just getting into like nitty-gritty hardcore mechanic stuff. It talks about raiding, which is like when you get to steal stuff, when you roll the yellow dice. And then it talks about scoring, which is all pretty straightforward. There are 3 like objective markers, and depending on which one is next to the thing you score for, you get that many points. They increase over the duration of the game. And then the game ends once someone has enough power to cross the threshold. Whew. Yeah, it really stumbles across the finish line in terms of like keeping me engaged with it the whole way through, which sucks. Especially because you get to things like prelude actions, new actions, modifiers. And then they do talk about the leaders and lore part, which they do recommend doing after you play a game or 2. So that I appreciate. So that was the rule book. And I think the first half is really good. I think I would say up to like the playing a chapter section is pretty good. Maybe even through the standard actions. But once they start getting into battle, that's when they start losing me, because there's a lot going on with battling, even though it is not that complicated. I don't know what they could have done to make that better. Maybe I just skimmed it wrong. Overall though, as a reference though, I will say once you know how to play, this is actually very well organized for if you need to look up something specific. I found that usually if I had a question about how a rule worked, I could find it really quickly and answer it pretty quickly, which is good. That's what you want out of a rule book. You have the table of contents on the front, you have the index on the back. It was easy to pull stuff up if needed. So that's good. Now, in terms of teaching it, we need to talk about the player reference guides, or the menus, as I call them. These behemoths are the player reference guides, and these actually, honestly, is what I would recommend people read when they're learning how to play the game. Because this basically just summarizes all of the actions and like information that the game has in a much shorter, more digestible content. And this little pamphlet, I really wish was a card. I wish they had made action cards and battle cards and ambition and scoring cards. Like 3 more cards per player, that's 12 more cards. I don't know if it was in the budget to do 12 more cards. It probably wasn't, but I would have much rather had cards than these pamphlets, because I can't hand this to someone without them getting overwhelmed. I played this game exclusively with people that play these kinds of games, and when I handed them these, they were like, oh, okay. And so what I wound up doing was I taught them everything on the front page as well as the actions on the inside. I mentioned that battling was a thing you could do, and then I handed it to them and I was like, all right, all that complicatedness is I just taught you the 3 of the 4 pages. The last page is just scoring. Like, I had to prep them for giving them these, which that worked pretty well. They were less overwhelmed when I told them that I pretty much explained everything on here. But yeah, I wish there was a smaller version of this. This has a lot of good information. I like that this exists, but I would rather this be like a teacher's guide rather than like a player manual. Like this really is like the player's guide for Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's a lot of rules, a lot of which you don't really need to know off the top of your head because someone's going to teach you them in theory. But you could learn how to play the whole game pretty much from here. There are very few concepts and things in here that you would need to know ahead of time. These things were not helpful to the teach, which is what I care about here. As we started playing, I do think that these were helpful for players to look at. I did see everybody kind of using these as the game went on. And I think this is nice that everybody had all the rules for the game in a convenient thing that you can pass out, so that nobody had to reach for the rule book. Everybody had their own thing. They could just check on like what the actions do. Like, the action summaries are really good. I honestly would, like, if I wasn't so scared to do it, I would actually just cut this page off and just use the actions, because the action page is actually really useful and it makes it not very overwhelming. I kind of wish they put boxes around the actions so that it's really clear that these are just like a set of actions that you're going to be using throughout the game. So it's like, this is the build action, this is the tax action, this is the influence action, so that you can clearly see, like, I have these 6 actions and then the battle action is like a separate thing. Yeah, these make it very difficult to teach. Like, for fun, once we got into it, Arcs is very interesting and dynamic and cool to watch unfold. But man, getting people there is rough. So yeah, we'll talk about my the actual games themselves. The first game that I played was at BGG Con. I played with 3 other people. They all were pretty experienced with these kinds of games. We didn't play with the leader and lore cards. It was my first time teaching it. I think I did an okay job. The first round was pretty rough. No one was declaring ambitions because I don't think I explained them well enough. I did talk about why you do it and when you would do it. how they score. And that seemed to be a little overwhelming for people, and it gave everybody a lot of analysis paralysis. So I don't think that was the right call. And I'll talk about how I'm going to fix that in a sec. The rest of the game went okay. There were a few rules hiccups here and there. Most of them were minor things like, do damage ships contribute to control? When a card uses this word, does it mean this or does it mean this? Like, it was all very like small minor things. It was never anything major. I think that the first game for it went about as good as it could have gone. We did play all the way through, and I did lose. I think I got last, which is good. You want to lose as the teacher, if you can, without like making it obvious that you were trying to. I wasn't trying to. I was trying to win, and it didn't go well. I wouldn't say that you want to like try to lose as the teacher, but like it's good if you do lose as the teacher, because people are more willing to play games again if they win. They tend to enjoy them more if they win. So, you know, it's good if there's a way that you can make yourself lose without making it like, without intentionally trying to lose. You know, like there's riskier strategies you can go for that tend to end in loss more. I think the main struggle pain point was the initiative and cards part. It wasn't even so much as like how they worked. It was more just like a why. Like, why is it interesting that these actions are split up these ways? Why is it interesting that I have to follow suit, but with a higher number to be able to get all my actions? You know, I agree with him. I don't necessarily know if the trick-taking aspect was like the right approach for it, but after the game, we all concluded that it's not really a trick-taking game, and if you don't describe it as one, it makes a little bit more sense. It's action selection, but with cards, and it's like, okay, that makes more sense. That was the first game. The second game didn't wind up finishing because one of the persons had to go, but he was winning by like a landslide, so it didn't really matter. This is the one where the guy built like 7 cities in the first round. He's very sharp. He picked it up really quick. But this was a game where we had kind of an imbalance of skill. We had me, like an average player. We had him, a very smart analytical player. And then we had his wife, who likes casual games. It doesn't really engage with war games like this, so she didn't have experience with like the kinds of strategy and things that you have to do with it. So it was weird, this like dynamic of like one person who can really analyze all the systems and see the best way to exploit them, whereas you had us, which were just here to have a good time. By the end of the game, which was only at round like 2, he was over like 15 points ahead of everybody, which is a lot. So he was obviously going to win, but yeah, he had to leave early. That teach went a little better. I don't think it really came from anything that I did differently, because I pretty much taught it the exact same way. I think I just got better at explaining the mechanics quickly and going through the important parts. I think what I would do differently. How would I teach this game? Here are some of my general strategies. 1, I think I want to make or find someone who has made cards that are reference cards and not manuals or pamphlets, because these are a lot, and it's hard to hand this to people. Even the people that were really experienced with games in general were overwhelmed when I handed them this reference, which isn't what you want your player reference to do. You want them to see like, oh, this game isn't as complicated as I think it is. I think if you had a card that literally was just like, on your turn, play a card, take actions based on the card you played. Here are the available actions across all the cards. And then you just have build, move, repair, tax, secure, influence, battle. And then whoever played the highest suit normally takes initiative or something like that. And I think just that alone with nothing else on it, no clarifications, no any extra things, maybe like a parentheses around move to say like, or catapult move. Yeah, you could even put like a 3-word summary. So it's like build a ship or building on the map, repair a damaged ship or building, tax a resource from a city, move ships to an adjacent system, influence a card of the court, secure a card from the court, battle to destroy pieces and steal cards and resources. Like, they have the short summaries already on here. Like, I wasn't coming up with those, I was just reading those off. So yeah, the player pamphlets should have been cards, and I think if I make my own, that'll make the teach a lot easier. I think once you get through the first round, I think after the first round, if then you handed out these and be like, all right, if you need any more clarifications on the rules, here's a little guide that tells you everything you might need to know. They could go like, oh, okay, I know all these words. I know what this is. I remember this. I see it written out now. Okay, cool. And then they wouldn't really need it. But that's my first thing that I would try. The second thing I want to try, and this is probably going to get, I don't think kickback, but I don't think people will agree with me that it's a good idea. But I think that for the first round, you preemptively declare ambitions. And by that I mean the start of the first chapter of the game. You say, all right, for the first chapter in your first game of Arcs, the 3 ambitions that we're going to be scoring at the end of this chapter are Tycoon, Keeper, and Empath. Here's why. Those are the only ones that don't involve taxing, don't involve securing, don't involve battle, and they're likely going to be the ones that wind up getting declared anyways. I think it also will help with that beginning analysis paralysis, because then I can say like, all right, here's how you get those particular symbols. And then I can point to the guild or the court deck row, and I can be like, these have those symbols. If you influence these and then secure them later, that'll add to your total for this objective. And if you tax that city you have, that'll give you one of those icons for that. I can declare, like, not having a goal at the very beginning is very bad for players learning how to play, because when I'm teaching a game, I specifically talk about what your goal is, not necessarily how to win. I do mention how to win, but the goal is like what I really focus on, what you're supposed to do right now. And with Arcs, it's not like a game where you go and like you can say your goal really easy, because your goal is to set up an ambition that you then get to score on, which is like a weird thing to explain to someone. I can't go like, okay, so your goal right now is to figure out which of these scoring criterias you think you can meet the best, because they don't know that yet. And even if they did, at the very, very, very beginning of the game, everything's so open that you can really kind of go for whatever you want, unless other than maybe Warlord, if you don't have any aggression cards in your hand. I don't think that it would be that game breaking or that experience diverting to say, yeah, the first chapter, Tycoon, Keeper, Empath, here's how you get those symbols, and have that be the goal for everybody. And then I think then in the next chapter, that's when you talk about declaring ambitions. And I think by that point, you've also played enough of the game that things like Tyrant and Warlord make more sense. They might have already accidentally stumbled into how you get stuff for Tyrant. They may have already accidentally stumbled into how to get things for Warlord. So by preemptively having those ambitions for someone's first game, I think that works out a lot better. If you're like a board game purist, I don't think you would find that to be acceptable. I think you would find that to be very obnoxious. I think that it's a better idea than trying to make it all make sense in the first chapter. I think it's not going to for most people. Maybe you're some kind of savant, but the people that I play with, and myself included, are not savants, and we need the help. So I think if I could try those 2 main things, having better resource cards and then using the preset ambitions for the first chapter, I think that would help a lot with the kind of learning curve. Because right now it's a wall. Like, you have to get past that to understand what you're doing. In the second game I was teaching, one of the players was like, I don't know what I'm doing. It was the person sitting to my right. They were like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't get why I'm doing this. I don't get why I want to go for these things. And I explained the ambitions again, and that didn't help. But if I could point to one of them and go, that one will give you points. If you get more of that symbol, you will get points. Here is how you get that symbol. You do this, that, or the other. And like, it's just clear cut. It's already set up. I think that would help explain the mechanics a bit more. So that's my 2 main ideas. Other ideas I have is to just not include the battle action until chapter 2, using like some kind of, like, I would put like a dice on the chapter 2 marker and be like, we don't get to fight until chapter 2 because we're all at peace right now, or something stupid. Just that way I can put off explaining how battle works until later. Because it's the most complicated action by far. It has multiple steps, and you have to resolve things in a certain order, and the outcome of certain symbols changes depending on what's defending, and what you get depends on what you destroy, and also it sometimes marks your prelude actions, which means then you have to talk about prelude actions. So, yeah. That's the other thing, prelude actions. I don't know when the best time to talk about those is. Like, usually when I'm teaching something that's really complicated, I will do my best to answer questions as they come up. So if someone asks like, hey, what's this prelude thing on my player board? I can be like, oh, okay, let me explain that to everyone. But prelude, the problem with it is that it's a limited resource. You have to earn it back, and it's dependent on what type of resource you have, and sometimes they're not useful to you at the moment, especially weapon. The weapon prelude action just gives you access to the battle ability. It doesn't let you do anything extra. All the other ones let you do an extra thing, but weapon specifically doesn't let you do an extra battle. It adds the word battle to your card so that you can take the battle action no matter what you played. I don't know why that one's different, but it adds one more thing to this. You know, if it was just build or repair, move, battle, secure, and then Psionic was take an action of the lead card like it is now, that would be so much better. At least from a teach perspective. I think gameplay-wise it makes sense. Like, you don't want people being able to just spam battles because of the blue dice. So the blue dice are the skirmish dice. I think that's what they're called. What are they called? Yeah, they're skirmish dice. Go me. These dice basically will not let you take damage. So if you have a bunch of battle actions, you can just blow up all their stuff if you have a bunch of battle actions. So, yeah. That's weird. Overall, Arcs is a really hard game to teach. I think I have ways to make it easier for someone's first game. It does sort of give them a drier experience, but I don't think it would hurt the actual experience of the game so much that someone would think that it's a fundamentally different thing and that they don't like it based on the changes that I would suggest. And so I think that the changes that I had idea, which is the, removing ambition declaration at the beginning of the game, not talking about battle to the second chapter, or unless someone explicitly asks for it, and the third thing I mentioned. I'm still sick. I don't really know what day it is, to be honest. And then having reference cards. I think that those three things would make for a really good onboarding experience, and I would love to test that and push it through. So, Leader Games, if you want to sponsor me. No, again, thank you to Leader Games for sending me this. That was very sweet of them. Everybody over there has been super nice, so that's been lovely. And I think that's basically it. Yeah, I'm gonna go take a nap because I'm tired, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening if you got through all this. Appreciate you listening to my little podcast thing. I don't know how to end these still, so I guess it just will now. That was one of the things that bothered me. Cool. That's the end of my notes, so now I'm just going blind. I've been sick. I didn't have time to come up with all sorts of things to talk about, so